I'd like to welcome each one of you tonight. Thanks so much for coming to share your beautiful evening with us. On behalf of the Diversity Action Team of Rock County, I would like to welcome you to our program, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Next slide, please. The Diversity Action Team's mission is to eliminate racism and discrimination in Rock County by embracing diversity, valuing multiculturalism, and fostering justice, dignity, and respect for everyone. These partners also share our mission. Beloit NAACP Branch 3251, Hedberg Public Library, Janesville League of Women Voters, Social Justice Edgerton, UW-Madison Division of Extension Rock County, and the YWCA Rock County. Because of our respect for all people, we share this land acknowledgement statement. We would like to recognize that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of Native nations. In Wisconsin, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations and one seeking to regain federal recognition. So important. We acknowledge these indigenous communities who have stewarded this land through the generations and pay respect to their elders, past and present. I thank the DAT Allies of Native Nations for all their work in this area. Next slide, please. Oh, Zoom etiquette, yes. And how many Zooms have you been a part of already? Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to be asking, since we have several presenters, if when our presenters start, that you take care of your visual picture, putting on your happy faces, and write any questions you may have, or share any resources in the chat portion of the Zoom. Any questions that you'd rather not put your name on, but ask, you may send it directly to me. Please stay muted so everyone can hear. Please stay muted. I know you have really cute pets and little ones that are darling and delicious suppers, but please stay muted and have your video turned off so we can all be respectful of our speakers today. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we have 3 presenters that will be starting us out with our DAT, with our program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Smith, who's the Rock County administrator. And thank you, Josh, so much for your powerful leadership.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to the DAT for inviting us here tonight to share a little about what the county has been doing as part of your program. As we talk a little bit about, as a preface, I guess, to our equity manager staff, sharing a little bit about what they are doing. Wanted to provide a little bit of background on how we came to hire our 2 equity managers, give a little context that might help provide some context for what they're going to talk to you about here in just a couple minutes. So it's appropriate that we're having this conversation in a community forum because the story of how we got to this point and the story of how really we're going to move forward from this point together are grounded in the support that we've gotten from the community over the years. So to illustrate that point, I thought it'd be worth going back to when I started in this role as county administrator. Early on in my tenure, one of the first things that I did is I was invited down to the Beloit Noon Rotary to speak, and I just happened to choose to talk about the county's workforce demographics and how we as a county need to do a better job of having a workforce that reflected our community for a variety of reasons. And who happened to be in the audience that day, just happened to be there, was Angela Moore, who at the time was the executive director of the YWCA. And so that was the beginning of a strong partnership the county has had with the YWCA on these issues over the years. And that was really the beginning, again, of my sort of relationship with community partners in this area, but it's really continued since that time, not just with me, but with other county staff. We've had conversations or sought advice or training from many in our community, like Dorothy Harrell and Neil Dupree and Santo Carfora, Billy Bob Cron, Francisca Reyna, Renee Bew, Amy Levy, many others, too numerous to mention. Many of you on here tonight. Appreciate all of your work and support with us as well. Also like to specifically point out and thank Mark Perry, who provided us significant support. Mark served as sort of the leader of our internal county working group as we were forming and norming on our internal diversity, equity, inclusion working group. And so much appreciation out to Mark as well. So as we got our work group going, we really started with an internal focus. That was something that I was really strong about, is wanting to focus internally, get our house in order first before we turned ourselves really out facing the community. And so we really spent some time internally looking at those things. What was the basis and the foundation for why this work was important to the county? And so, those list of those things will be familiar to many of you, if not all of you. Number one, as I mentioned, workforce related strategically, making sure that we were recruiting and retaining the largest pool of staff as possible, which is even more relevant today given the labor force issues that we're all facing. Creating that welcoming, inclusive environment is so important to all organizations. Research indicating that when you have a more inclusive environment, you have a diverse work group, you get better outcomes for your clients. And as a service-oriented organization, that's really important to the county as well. We also provide better services when we understand our clients better and ourselves better. And so that sort of training that we've gone through to better understand how clients want to receive services has also been very important. And as one of the largest employers in the county, we feel a responsibility to set an example. And so that we've embarked on this work for those reasons as well. And finally, as humans, we all need to feel included, to feel like that we're welcome. And so it's simply the right thing to do. So those sort of serve as the foundation of some of the work that we've been doing internally. But we did reach a point with our internal progress where we felt both from our countywide working group and our human services department working group that we had really just sort of, for lack of a better way of saying it, hit a wall and really felt that we couldn't make any more progress unless we had more resources and capacity, both to help us with our internal workings and then to finally pivot to kind of focus on our role and our influence in the community. Then in 2020, the county board passed a couple of resolutions. It's hard to believe that it's been a couple of years now, but those two resolutions condemning the death of George Floyd and then declaring racism a public health crisis gave further momentum to our efforts and really stated the county board's position on this work as well. And so that gave us further momentum. And then following those efforts that summer, Human Services Director Kate Luster and I felt that the time is right to ask for these two equity manager positions to help move us forward. And the county board approved those two positions in the 2021 budget. So a significant thank you and much credit to the county board of supervisors for supporting our DEI efforts since that time in particular. And so the board approved those two positions, and here we are today. The fruits of that labor, you will hear from very shortly here, as we have the two individuals who we're very thankful to have with us, working with us with the county, Tasha Bell and Tierra Coleman. And so that's sort of a little background of why we got to this place, how we got to this place. And with that, I would turn it back over to whoever is going to speak next. Thanks.
And that would be me. 1 second.
Thank you so much, Josh, for that introduction for Mrs. Bell and Dr. Coleman.
All right, thank you, Josh. So hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Tierra Coleman. I am one of the 2 Rock County equity managers. I started in December, so I'm still relatively new, but excited to be on board. A little bit of background about me. I am a trained sociologist, so my interests include society structures, systems, and functions. My research has surrounded issues of racial and gender inequality, and I've worked with several organizations on their DEI efforts. I've done assessment and evaluation, and my most recent role before joining Rock County was the Associate Dean at Beloit College, where I helped them establish their Becoming Better plan, which is their anti-racism plan. So the work I hope to bring to the county is a paradigm shift. I want to dismantle inequitable systems, and I want to focus on a lens change. I want to focus on how does one have an understanding of their own positionality and privilege. I want us to all become more aware of our own biases and learn how we can empathize with those who have identities that we do not hold. I'm less interested in kind of equity tips and tricks and more of creating space where we can all be on the same page about creating an environment that is welcoming to everyone. But within that environment, I think it's really important that we all have the type of relationship that versus being afraid of being called out if you make a mistake, we have a culture of calling each other in when we recognize an inequity, and we can work together to learn, grow, and create an inclusive environment. So the approach I bring to the county is a culture of equity. And what this is a culture of equity exists when organizational policies, practices, mindsets, resource allocations, and decision-making all have the goal of ensuring that everyone has a fair and just opportunity for health and well-being. In organizations that have a strong culture of equity, there is an explicit focus on removing barriers that create inequity. So that's our focus. But what does this look like? So I kind of wanted to go over what DEI has been and what we want it to look like for the county. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is not new. But unfortunately, it has a history in many places and spaces of being kind of that annoying side initiative that keeps people from focusing on their real work, or the same implicit bias training repeatedly, or honestly, a topic that people like to avoid because it can make people uncomfortable or cause tense conversations. Some of this is because it can be tempting to view equity work like we do all of the rest of our work at our jobs, which is to meet expected goals that better the organization. And usually that work makes people feel good. But equity work is different. Equity work is about accountability. Equity work requires communication skills and emotional intelligence that people may not even exercise in their lives outside of work. So equity work is about dismantling current systems of oppression, disrupting the status quo. And to those who have never had to question their own privilege, equality and equity can quickly feel like oppression to them. So these are the components that are necessary for the work to be successful. But equity work is people work, and people, while lovely, love people, people are complex. We all have different lives, experiences, knowledge bases, emotions. So what could this work be? I'm hoping this work, like I said, can be a paradigm shift. I want to do the work, change this work from being performative or a side initiative into effective organizational change. This work requires standing up against both external and internal threats. And so that is calling in those who may spew racist ideologies, but also identifying within ourselves what thoughts, what language, what actions that we might have that might align with racist or inequitable ideologies. One way to hold ourselves accountable is speaking truth to power. Unlike other places that I have worked within the county, my supervisor, Josh Smith, has created an environment that my expertise on equity is listened to and is empowered. It is not silenced for everyone else's comfort. And support from leadership is key to this work. Sometimes we like to skirt around things that make us uncomfortable. Sometimes we like to skirt around things such as the word racism and call it other things to make people feel more comfortable. But let's talk about what racism really is. According to Ibram Kendi, an author, professor, and an anti-racist activist, he defines racism as a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity and are substantiated by racist ideas. And so that takes the discussion out of, are people racist or whether they're good or bad? But this is referring to racism as anyone who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or their inactions. This puts the work on all of us to intentionally express and support anti-racist and equitable ideas. As a county, we are not only focused on race, but all marginalized groups who are underserved or experience discrimination. And discrimination takes many forms. So this includes those from diverse gender and sexual orientations, to veterans, to immigrants, to those who are neurodivergent, those with disabilities, and all other groups who experience differential treatment. As a county, we have to actively promote and support equitable policies to ensure that we're serving the entire county. And Rock County is filled with lots of different people who hold various types of identities. So that is the work. But what are some challenges to this work? Why is this so difficult? Because like I said before, equity work is people work, and people, while lovely, are complex. This slide shows the Kubler-Ross change model, which demonstrates our emotional responses to change. And if you notice, if you look at the different stages of this model, this doesn't look fun. The first stages include shock, denial, and frustration. This is how people emotionally respond to change. And if you notice, this is also the beginning of the grief stages of shock, denial, and frustration. So what does this tell us? This tells us that change is hard, but organizational change is even harder. Embedding equitable approaches into the workplace is not just seen as extra work, but it emotionally impacts people. And there's a lot of evidence that supports this. In Brene Brown's recent book, Atlas of the Heart, she surveyed thousands, tens of thousands of people on what experiences within their lives made them feel the most vulnerable. And at the top of that list was talking about race at work. In another study, a neurological study where they were looking at the different parts of the brain that light up according to different stimuli. When people felt that there was a status change, that something in their life was at risk of changing, the same areas of the brain lit up as when someone held a deadly weapon to their head. That's fear. And finally, the last thing I want to share on this particular topic is that Tasha and I recently had the privilege of having a conversation with Debbie Irving, a phenomenal speaker on equity work. And she explained that she frequently asks groups that she works with a question about DEI work. She asks people, what is your greatest fear when it comes to DEI work? Tasha and I also asked this within the DEI work group at the county. And we got various different answers of the fear of making a mistake, a fear of being called out, a fear of making a mistake, and then all the work that you've done previously is seen as performative. But Debbie shared a jarring response that she got in the past, which was someone said that their greatest fear of this type of work was that if equity work is successful, then Black and brown people will then run society. The liberal or woke white people will maintain their status in society, but everyone else will be on trains to concentration camps. Think about the gravity of that answer. Think about how serious that fear is. But more importantly, this demonstrates the real problem when it comes to this work, is that people don't have a shared understanding of this work's goal. Our goal of equity in the county is liberation for all. But some people view our current systems of oppression in this country and think that is the only way that things can exist. Some people don't have a lens of liberation. They think that the only options are to be oppressed or to oppress. So understanding all of this is the work. But now that I've listed the challenges and how difficult this work could be, I want to share some of the approaches and how we plan to embed this into the county. And so many people have heard of critical mass, but I like to talk about embedding these ideas into the county as the best way to do it is obtaining critical yeast. Critical mass ensures that a large proportion of a group is on board with an idea, but critical yeast is different. Critical yeast doesn't necessarily need the masses at first, but strategically placed individuals who can spread equitable approaches. I'd like to tell the story of the Macaque Monkeys to demonstrate how this could work. The Macaque Monkeys were a monkey that was researched heavily in the past. And they lived on a particular island where their main source of food was sweet potatoes. One day, a scientist observed that one of the monkeys, while attempting to eat a sweet potato, accidentally dropped its sweet potato in the water. The monkey looked stunned that this happened, but just picked up the potato out of the water and it ate it. The researcher tracked this particular monkey for a while and witnessed that after that, the monkey continued to drop its sweet potato in the water before it ate. As time went on, more and more monkeys were witnessed dropping their sweet potatoes into the water before they ate them. And within a year's time, that practice had spread across the entire island, and almost every monkey was now washing their sweet potato before it ate. Now, as we think about how that happened, I'm no expert on monkeys, but I highly doubt that the original monkey started giving talks and speeches about washing sweet potatoes. I also doubt that it tried to create a monkey law that before you eat, you have to dunk your sweet potato in water. What that monkey was doing was just living its best little monkey life, and other monkeys witnessed this behavior. They tried it and it turned out to be delicious and it spread. They voluntarily embraced this change. That is how we want to approach this work. We are trying to create an inviting environment that people want to be a part of. This work can't work through fear of discussing difference. But as society inevitably becomes more diverse, we can create inviting environments to give people the opportunity to learn, embrace difference, and witness for themselves the benefits of equity. So this is how we're approaching this work, creating inviting environments. So what does that look like in terms of our initial priorities? So our job is twofold. We have our internal priorities for the current employees of Rock County, as well as external priorities for the residents of the county. First, I want to start by talking about some of the internal priorities. How are we going to gain critical yeast? My initial priorities are focused on recruitment, onboarding, and training. Yes, in the background of all of this work, I am reviewing and strategizing how to revise policies and procedures. But if there's not a true understanding of why these changes are important and necessary, the changes to policies and procedures won't be successful. I facilitate a monthly DEI group within the county. This work group was established long before I arrived. It consists of individuals from several departments around the county, along with Josh Smith, the county administrator, who work together to embed equitable approaches into their departments and the county as a whole. From this work group and understanding the needs of the county, we've been focusing on recruitment by further diversifying our workforce and creating an inclusive space so that we can retain good talent. We focus on onboarding, which is ensuring that we are providing the immediate support employees need to thrive within their positions. And we've also focused on trainings, and trainings for all, for staff, leadership, and the board of supervisors. We've embedded a yearly training requirement for all county employees, where each year the employees have to complete 2 DEI trainings. And in addition, many departments have incorporated equity presentations or an equity agenda item into their ongoing meetings. And so this is keeping this from being a side initiative, but this is being threaded through the county's everyday practices. Again, our focus is on equity of all kinds. And yes, racial inequities are within many conversations, but we are focused on all marginalized groups of all sorts. So there's a lot of work happening within the county, too much to share at this meeting, but my esteemed colleague, Tasha Bell, will share a little bit more about her background, as well as some of the specific things that are happening within our Human Services Department. Tasha?
All right, good evening. My name is Tasha Bell. Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman. So what Dr. Coleman gave you is kind of an overview of what things look like if you take a step back and look on the county level. So by way of introduction, my name is Tasha Bell. I am a proud Beloit native. Prior to joining the county, I worked in education, starting with my first job, which was at the Merrill Community Center. So I've always worked with within my community, and that is something that I am very proud of. My background includes being a nationally trained SEED leader, which is seeking educational equity and diversity. I'm trained in Beyond Diversity. I have had experience working with the National Equity Project, as well as I'm currently in an equity officer cohort through ICMA. So that has definitely helped me get adjusted to county government and what that looks like. So prior to me beginning work almost a year ago in June, the county as a whole was doing work on equity. They were already doing things. And so by the time that these positions were posted, they had a good footprint of what equity work would look like within the county. So I was fortunate to come in to Human Services where work was being done. So I want to highlight some of those things that have been done prior to my arrival, and also since I have been a part of the team here in Rock County. So we actually have a diversity statement, which reads, Rock County Human Services values diversity as a core component of strength among its workforce and clientele. We create and embrace a welcoming and inclusive organizational culture and commit to culturally competent practice and service delivery. So Atira mentioned that we have a county EDI work group, HSD, which is one of the largest departments in the county, also has our own equity, diversity, and inclusion work group as well. We have about 12 core members. We meet as a large group on once a month, but also within our 12 members, we also have many subgroups that include policy, communication, training, etc. We also provide a resource guide that we send out to staff within our Human Services Department. And all of those things can be found internally on our website for our employees to access. So for example, if they miss an opportunity, we still drop it into our SharePoint site and they are able to access all of those resources, not just written resources. Sometimes they're videos, sometimes they're links, sometimes they're book suggestions, etc. So you heard me mention the committee SharePoint, which makes it a lot easier for our employees to access all of those things. All right. So in 2020, prior to my arrival, this committee compiled a staff survey to get feedback about what things would look like to help improve the Human Services Department. The committee continues to engage in activities that monitor department progress, and we narrowed it down to 4 priority areas just because we understand that all people are not able to do all of the things. So we wanted to slow down a little bit and say, let's talk about what we are actually able to do. So we focus on the acknowledgement of systemic racism from top management, as well as a commitment to prioritize equity, diversity, and inclusion into all of our department-wide things, initiatives, policies, and practices, ongoing training and accountability for middle management for the department, as well as ongoing training and professional development for staff in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And you heard Dr. Coleman talk about the county having the 2 trainings that are required of all staff. Obviously, in human services, that is a requirement as well. Intentional and prioritized efforts to hire and retain diverse staff. That is also something that Dr. Coleman and I work on together. All right, so here are some highlights of some things that have happened. And I want to be clear that as Dr. Coleman mentioned, as Josh mentioned as well, there's so much, right? But we're going to keep it concise for tonight. We do welcome to continue this conversation as well. So some of the things that we have accomplished since June of 2021, we organized a safe zone training for our HSD leadership. And when I say HSD, that's Human Services Department, and that's about 60 people within our department. We also collaborated with our countywide diversity and inclusion committee to offer a whole chunk nation trainings to all. It was open to all employees. We had about 80 of our employees hop on to join us for that. And we are actually currently in the process of offering another series of different topics related to Ho Chunk. We also have created an in-house diversity and inclusion training for our staff in HSD. And I'm very proud to say that I work with Dr. Kendra Schiffman on that training. We are currently running that training once a month. We just started doing that again. Previously, we did it and we did about 84 staff. I mentioned being a part of the ICMA equity cohort. We also have started affinity spaces within human services. So we have about 6 affinity spaces that we offer to staff. This is something that staff are able to participate in, and they actually don't have to participate only at lunchtime. So it's not a penalty for them to participate in affinity spaces. And I'm super proud, again, of Kate's leadership and willingness to say, I support this. This is something that I want to do. So that is amazing. Some of you may have heard that we are working with Ywca, which is an agency based out of Minnesota, and we are doing some reform around child protective services. So I also co-lead a parent and community work group with the Ywca Community Cultivator. We also have a core steering committee. Core is something that we use to influence and change our employee culture within human services. So I lead the steering committee, which means that all of those committees that exist in core meet together once a month. Another thing that we have implemented is we do micro learning for our leadership meetings. So that is all people who hold supervisory roles within HSD participate in micro learning. And we do that once a month. And so each department or each team within HSD comes to present an equity challenge or an equity success. And they walk us through what this looks like. And it allows us to workshop some of these challenges that we have had. Sometimes people from different teams will come with something, maybe it talks about a client's pronouns and how do you address it and what happens. And it allows us to workshop with real examples what kind of equity challenges we are facing in the day-to-day work. And this is something that is new. But the staff have been very receptive of it, and they appreciate the opportunity to not only share their challenges, but to get meaningful feedback from their colleagues who are also in a supervisory role about how do you handle these things in real time. So there are so many things that are happening within the world of HSD as well as within the county. I want to make sure that I uplift to say that Dr. Coleman and I are colleagues, and we have standing meetings once a week. Sometimes we meet more than that to make sure that the things that we are doing in HSD translates over to what we're doing countywide and vice versa. So all things that we do align so that we have the same definition throughout the county that we are using within the Human Services Department. So now I'll kick it back over to Dr. Coleman to get into the what else.
Thank you, Tasha. That was a great demonstration of how I was talking about we can obtain that critical yeast. All of those different components that Tasha talked about are embedded in the daily workings of the county employees. So there's different equity touch points everywhere they go. And that's how we're trying to center that work. And that's how we're trying to create that culture of equity and an environment that people want to be a part of. And so the next thing that I want to briefly discuss is that I talked about, both of our positions are twofold. A lot of that work was some of the internal things that are going on, but we also are prioritizing the residents of the county. We are focusing on their equitable access to the services of the county, as well as equitable treatment for all of the county's clientele. As Tasha stated, we meet honestly multiple times a week. And the more we kind of assess the work that is going on in the county, the more we realize that there's a lot of good quality equity work already going on. And we don't always want to have to recreate the wheel. What we want to do is support and amplify all of those efforts. And so our goal is to kind of create a hub that we can unite this work. We can locate redundancies, find gaps in the equity work for the county, and ensure that all of our efforts are aligned to provide the best support possible for the county. So we are planning an actual gathering of this, gathering of community partners to get involved, have conversations, identify shared goals, and create an explicit list of how the county can support all of this. So how can we work together? We felt that this was a great opportunity, considering that there's a lot of people on this call who have a vested interest in the equity within Rock County, to kind of do our ask. And our ask is that if any of the work that you heard today inspires you, or you want to be a part of it, or you want to discuss how we can further amplify our goals together, we ask that you fill out a form that I'll put into the chat. It's a easy Microsoft form, little survey that you can complete. It's very short, but letting us know that you would be interested in kind of joining other community leaders to discuss these things. This will give us an opportunity for all of us to get to know each other, kind of learn the key players, and ensure that resources are being allocated equitably so that we can all reach our goals. And so with that, I'd like to thank you so much for listening to us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will put that form into the chat so that you can complete it if you would be interested in joining us for a meeting. And now we can open it up for any specific questions that you may have for myself, Tasha, Josh Smith, or equity work at the county level broadly. So if you do have any questions, feel free to utilize the chat feature, or if you feel so inclined and comfortable, unmuting yourself and asking.
Hi, I have a question. This is Lindsay Stevens.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi. So I'm curious if there has been any efforts in like letting the community know about the wonderful work that you guys are doing around DEI, just because there has been such a positive shift in what the county is doing for our communities throughout Rock County. So I'm just wondering if there has either been things like maybe presentations, or if there has been stuff going on already, or if there's a plan, maybe their first step was training and things going on with staff first and then educating the community. But you guys are doing some amazing things, and thank you for that. And so I just want to know, like, how are we spreading the word to the community so they know about what you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. So I think we are in the process of building that capacity. This kind of meeting of bringing in some of the community partners for collaboration is a part of that. But other efforts have been kind of enhancing our external communications. So the website, the county website has been redone. I've redone our equity website that you can go see. We will start to update that with different things going around the county, as well as tracking some of our progress. So that is something that you can follow. But we are also, since Tasha and I are both here now, trying to become more a part of events and opportunities to share what we're doing. So for instance, there'll be a booth at the Juneteenth celebration, kind of talking about some of the job opportunities and things that the county has to offer. So it's definitely something we're building on. We have to build the capacity for it, but that's definitely on our list of priorities to do. We want to involve the community as much as possible. Thank you for that question, Lindsay.
And I'll just add as well, Human Services just hired a communication specialist. So within the last month, I believe that Jordan Miller is officially our communication specialist. So definitely something that we are working on. Stay tuned and you will hear more about it. I also see in the chat that it is, can you talk more about Affinity Spaces? So Affinity Spaces, the way that we are using Affinity Spaces within Human Services, focus on staff that are not larger populations in our staff. For example, we have a Black women affinity space, we have a Black men affinity space, we have a staff of color, we have an LGBTQ affinity space, we also have a women of color affinity space. We also have an allies affinity space for white people who identify as allies that would like to have an affinity space in which that they can talk about things that work for them in the affinity space.
I see we have another question asking about how many total county staff hours are dedicated to DEI initiatives each month on average. I don't think there's an actual way to track the hours, but I will say that that way of thinking about it is kind of what we're trying to get out. We do have the training requirement that is a yearly training requirement. And if you take part in that, that's usually at least 4 hours a year. And like I said, there's embedded agenda items into people's regular staff and department meetings. But we don't want it to be viewed as kind of this initiative that you have to think about the hours that you're putting in, and more of something that's just embedded into everyone's everyday work. When you're strategizing about doing a new project, you're also thinking about how to make it equitable, who has accessibility to it, who are you targeting, and who is being left out. And that type of thing, we want it to be a lens. We want it to be a mindset. And so we don't track the hours, but we do track people's kind of engagement into the work through trainings, through them attending things like our DEI meetings, affinity groups, and things of that sort. So I hope that that answers at least part of your question. We have some thank yous from people, so thank you for that. And then another question is, could you please share with us where an employee could report if they have been a victim of discrimination? And I know that this is something that the HSD committee is particularly working on. So I'll defer to Tasha.
All right, so the way that any form of discrimination would happen is the way that it stands right now, that would be reported to HR. They could certainly have a conversation with their direct supervisors as well, but if not, if they feel uncomfortable with that, they can report it directly to HR. However, the Human Services, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team is actually working on a racial harassment policy. We actually have a 3-hour meeting devoted to that tomorrow to workshop what that would look like for us, because we do not currently have a racial harassment policy and what that would look like within the county. So we are actually working on that. But in the interim, and what stands is that it would be an HR issue.
And I will also say that by Tasha and I making our presence more known around the county, we're also hoping that we can be a resource that people can reach out to us. We've created a specific email just for the equity managers, so people can contact us and talk about these things, and hopefully, you know, before someone has to file a report, talk about what's going on and help find a solution. We have a question: does the public have access to the county's training resources? I'll say at this current moment, just because of, you know, the current budgets and the capacity of training all 1,400 county employees, mostly no. There may be some opportunities in the future with certain presenters or presentations where we may be able to open it up, and we'll advertise those things. But currently, these trainings are primarily for those who are employed by Rock County.
I have a question I'd like to address Tasha or Tierra, whoever is comfortable answering it. How have you gone about creating the critical yeast? Because I think that's really a cool, I love it. I love the concept that needs to come from within. So would you share with us how you've done that so other organizations might learn from you?
Sure. Well, I'll say we're still building it. We're both fairly new, so I don't want to say that we've already established it. But I think a key way that we're building it, one is the DEI work groups, and that's because they hold leadership within them. So these are people that are department managers and have a real want to embed these equitable policies. And so I'll give an example. Tasha spoke about some of the gender diversity training that has been done, discussing pronoun use and things of that sort. We're trying to normalize the use of pronouns and email signatures and important correspondence around the county. So to create that critical yeast versus making it a requirement that everyone add something to their email signature, we talk with the department heads as well as those within the DEI work group. We discuss with them the importance of these things. Then they embed these things into their work. So they start putting it within their email signatures. That demonstrates to their team the importance, but it also is a learning opportunity. If someone sees that and they don't know what it is, that creates the learning opportunity for them to ask, like, what's that about and why is that important? And then that slowly kind of gets people acclimated to some of these equitable norms that we're trying to build into the county. And so consistent touch points with these work groups, with these meetings, with not only our formal trainings, but things that I call equity shorts, which is when I go to departments and give like a 20-minute brief presentation on an equity tool that they can embed that day. People do that. And slowly you start to see that thing spreads. It spreads along the county because I can't personally interact with all 1,400 employees. I'd love to, but capacity, but I can work with some of the key members to create that critical yeast because we've well positioned these equitable approaches so that they're visible to the masses within the county.
So it sounds like the people in the county, they want to enjoy that sweet potato also.
Oh, they do. They found it delicious.
I love it. I like it.
Absolutely. All right, I just want to check in with Jean on time before I decide how many more questions that we can answer.
You can answer a few more.
Okay, thank you, Jean. I just want to be respectful of the other presenters today. So we have a question on how is the county doing in recruitment and retention at present? Is that something that Tasha and/or Josh may want to
Yeah, I
take?
thought maybe I could address this one. So, and this kind of, I
Perfect.
think, speaks to the question down below about biggest accomplishments. And this is again, just from my perspective, but, I mentioned at the outset of my comments that one of the initial things that we talked about was the workforce and recruitment retention. And one of the things I'm most proud about is that we really have improved our recruitment retention of staff of color, and we've really diversified our workforce. There was some work that some of you may be familiar with the Hugh Life reports that came out recently. That's one of the things they highlighted as a positive thing that the county had been doing. And one of our accomplishments, we've really increased our percentages in a way that I do feel like we're drawing on the larger workforce pool in the county. And again, that really was one of our initial thinking goals about this work. And strategically, and there's different sort of things you might highlight in front of different audiences, but one of the things that I do like to talk about our DEI work in front of the county board is really this issue that we all know the labor force and workforce issues that everybody's facing these days. And this is really a very strategic goal for the county of a way that we can improve the recruitment, retention, and just overall stability of our workforce at a time when that's definitely under stress. So, I don't have those numbers with you, but we've done some excellent analysis. Jody Serber, who's an analyst in the administrator's office, has done a lot of work in analyzing our HR data about that. And so I'm happy to share that with anybody who wants to see some of those analyses. Just reach out maybe to either Tierra or Tasha, and we'll get you those analyses as well.
And I think this question kind of goes off of that. So while you're already talking, Josh, but Amy asked, are we seeing an increase in BIPOC staff with respect to management?
Yeah, so I think we've been very purposeful about that. We have so some of the analysis that we've done. We measure sort of where our sort of individuals of color, I guess we'll say, fall out in each of those steps in the process. So we measure how many applicants are we getting demographically, how many are being called in for interviews, how many are making it past the sort of like any testing that occurs, how many are getting to the finalist round. And so I think what you'll see, it's been, we've been doing that analysis now for about 3 years. So we certainly would like some more there, but I think to make sure that you can get folks into higher levels of supervision and management, you've got to make sure they're passing all of those marks at first and sort of flowing up that chain, so to speak. And we've seen that in the data. It's not been entirely linear, but we are seeing improvement in those areas. And I think we have seen increases in our supervision and management levels of staff of color, maybe not as quickly as some people would like, and of course some people retire and move on. But I think overall we've seen an improvement in that area throughout the organization.
We had a question before that about what are some of the biggest accomplishments you would like to highlight the county has achieved in the last year regarding DEI initiatives. Considering I just started in December, I might defer some of that question to Tasha and Josh, but I would like to say that something that I was pleasantly surprised to see when I came on board to the county, because like I said, I've worked with a lot of different types of organizations, from government to higher ed to nonprofits, was the engagement. I was pleasantly surprised about the engagement for this work. Like I said, the DEI work group existed long before I got there. And this was a group that people volunteered to be a part of. So people chose to dedicate some of their time to creating equitable approaches within the county. And when I came on board, people were just filled with so many ideas and wanting to be trained and wanting to further discuss that. And I think that helps with the critical yeast, because I've definitely been in places or spaces before where they were just required to come talk to me, but they didn't necessarily want to make any changes. But that's not what I see within Rock County. I see a genuine effort to make change. But I will defer to my colleagues to maybe talk about specific changes that they would like to highlight.
So I will say that as far there's so many because this work has not been done before in the county. So I think that the county through the leadership of Josh and Kate making a very intentional decision to create these positions in a way in which work can be done. It's probably one of the biggest accomplishments, right? And then to already do the pre-work to make sure that whoever was hired for these positions will be coming into an environment that has been primed to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I think that that is a big accomplishment on behalf of the county. The willingness of our colleagues to be able to engage and also say, we're so thankful that y'all are here. I got a million ideas. Let me tell you what we've been waiting on. And so that those are some of the biggest accomplishments that I would see when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion within the county.
Again, I just reference back to the the strategic workforce changes that we've seen that are really due to all this work, but have really, I think, accelerated with each step we've taken, and again kind of culminating here at the moment with our 2 equity managers. And then just to jump to the next question there from Neil about connections, certainly Tierra has already referenced that a little bit, and kind of what we're trying to do now, sort of just pivoting to the external focus. But I will say an example relates to as was mentioned before. We've had these we did the series with Ho Chunk history, and we invited our friends from Beloit city government to attend that with us. That was really our first step to kind of invite, kind of to Santos' question, invite anybody in from outside Rock County, given the pending development of the casino. We knew it was important to have that dialogue and that partnership with our friends in Beloit. So that was an example, an early example maybe of how we've reached out to some of our partners and other local governments. But anything else, Tierra, Tasha, you want to add? Please go ahead.
I think that covers it. And I think that's our goal with kind of having this meeting and bringing in people to collaborate with, is that we don't want to exclude any parts of the Rock County community. Having aligned goals is the only way that we can really thread this through the county. So our goal is to consult with all of them. Oh, that's a good question. Did the YWCA's first racial justice conference have much of an impact on the county's motivation to do this work? I think that's a Josh question.
Yeah, great question. And that kind of goes back to more blanks of the story that weren't filled in there. But yeah, with when we started our relationship, beginning with Angela, and then after that time was when we had the first racial justice conference, and it really has had a significant impact. And I think each year that we've had the racial justice conference, I think Rock County has sent the highest number of its staff every year to participate in the racial justice conference. And so again, I would kind of refer back to the critical yeast that Dr. Coleman has mentioned. That that's another way that we're just providing opportunities to have our staff be engaged in the work. And so yes, it's the racial justice conference had significant impact, I think, on the county and its work in this area.
All right, so that is our time. I do want to thank you all for engaging, and then also encourage you again to fill out the form if you are interested in working with us. I will paste it again in the chat because we've had a lot of discussion, but I appreciate your time.
It gives me great pleasure to hear from you 3 about what's going on within the county. And I'm excited that you're including the individual city governments now, reaching out to them, reaching out to people, groups like us, because we do want to be spreading the word that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. Amy, I'd like for you to show the next slide, please. Okay. Amy? Could be supper
Yeah.
time.
1 second.
Because I've been a part of the diversity action team for so many years and have been so encouraged by all of the wonderful people that Santo and I have worked with. As I was thinking about this program, I really wanted to share a little bit of what was going on in my mind too. And with this base coming from the county and helping us all realize how we can fit together, I thought, it's most important that we work together individually to have this acceptance. And so relationships are vital in my mind. And this is what I'd like to share with you as far as my key strategy for DEI. Listen, learn, and share. We need to listen carefully to each other, repeat what we have heard, what we've learned, ask questions, don't assume, don't be embarrassed because you want to make sure what you heard was really valuable from the person you're talking with. Be patient, take time to process what you've learned, and then provide time for others to process. This change that Tierra was talking about takes a lot of time, a lot of patience on both sides. Speak up, sharing what you have learned. Don't be silent. We all need to speak our truth at this time in our history. And then I would encourage you to continue learning, whether it's through discussions or podcasts, YouTubes, articles, books. It is your responsibility. And we know you take it seriously. This whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in my mind, diversity is very understandable. That's clear. But when you're talking about equity, a lot of people wonder, why is equity so important? And why can't we just have equality? And I'd like to share a couple of examples with you that helped me figure it out a little better. And one of our friends has a grandson who's in a wheelchair, and the state was able to provide him with a free wheelchair. Now, if that was equal to everybody, we would all have a wheelchair, but we don't need that. This boy did, and he received one. That was his equity, meeting his needs where they were. I also think about a friend we Zoom with who has hearing issues, and she's able to use the live transcript that is available through the internet. And not all of us need that, but she certainly does, to feel included in her life journey. And I would say the same thing with scholarships for students who are doing well, but come from poverty and don't necessarily have the means to pay for it. Scholarships really make things much more available for some students. And so I see this as one of the biggest issues of equity that we can deal with. So I just want to say real quick that we did send out a questionnaire focusing on DEI to 18 different locations in Rock County. And we had a 60% return. I hear that's pretty darn good for a return. So I don't want to take a lot of time today talking about it, but if you are interested in those specific results, and they came from businesses and schools and city government, please email me. And the most promising response that I got from 3 different areas included: we are striving to mirror our city's demographics. And that gives me hope. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, and that's Sally Mccoy. She is with Rock County. She's the Rock County coordinator for the Poor People's Campaign, and she will update us on the efforts being made in addressing inequities and the lack of inclusivity within our society. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Jean. So this is going to be a quick presentation about what we're doing in Rock County. Rock County is just developing awareness in the community of what the Poor People's Campaign is about. So next slide, please. We always start a Poor People's Campaign meeting with what is called Mystica, which is a focus on music or poetry, some kind of way of grounding ourselves in the important work that we are doing. And this is a excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s Christmas sermon on peace. And I would like to have Amy read that for us.
Now, let me suggest first that if we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. We must develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And as long as we try, the more we are going to have war in this world. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in the inescapable network of mutuality. Tied in a single garment of destiny, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality.
Thank you, Amy. Next slide, please. The original Poor People's Campaign was started by Martin Luther King Jr. and his associates. And we don't have time to go into this video, but from the American experience, he is in this film talking to people in trailer parks and schools, asking them to join him in the Poor People's Campaign. I would encourage you to look this up, and I think they're going to put it in the chat. We don't have time to look through it. It's about 2.5 minutes, but it's a beautiful story of how he envisioned the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. Next slide, please. Click it. The 1968 campaign was envisioned as a way of revolutionizing the American system. And on his birthday, he and others talked about this revolution of values. But he was, of course, assassinated in April of 1968 when the campaign was taken over by Reverend Ralph Abernathy. And a short month after this, the campaign, Poor People's Campaign, was launched in DC on Mother's Day, May 12th, 1968. When I learned this, I was stunned really to recognize that such a short time after one of their membership was killed, their leadership was killed, they must have been shocked, in grief and in fear, but they still launched the campaign. And the next day, May 13th, Resurrection City launched in DC. Next slide, please. 10 caravans of poor people went to Washington, DC to persuade policymakers to end poverty. And you can see they came from the Northeast, from the South, and from the far West. Every time one of these caravans stopped in a city, they picked up new people to come to DC. Next slide, please. Including covered wagons. This mule train came from Mississippi. It never made it there in time, but it had a big impact on the people that saw it as they traveled. Next slide, please. The Resurrection City was this long, you can see it in the middle photo, this long encampment, which was made up of tents on plywood stands that housed families or single people. At one time, there were 3,000 people in Resurrection City that stayed for 42 days. In Resurrection City, there was free food, free education, free medical care, and every night there were educational sessions about what policies were affecting people. There was also religious services and music. This new community, Resurrection City, each day would have a delegation go to different departments of the government, for example, agriculture to look at food equity, and housing to look at housing equity. Unfortunately, one of the things that affected Resurrection City was that it rained 28 out of the 42 days. So it was very uncomfortable to stay there, and that limited some of their effectiveness. Next slide, please. We're going to go pass through this slide. We don't have time for it. The second revival of the Poor People's Campaign began on Mother's Day of 2018. And on 2019, Reverend William Barber and Reverend Leslie Theo Harris, the co-chairs, convened 1,000 community leaders in DC for the Poor People's Moral Action Congress and release of the Poor People's Budget. In the following year, there was supposed to be a march to Washington, but of course that was right after the pandemic emerged, and that was not possible. So it was digital. This year, there is going to be an actual march in Washington. Next slide, please. What are the components of the Poor People's Campaign to fight these 5 interlocking injustices: systemic poverty, systemic racism, militarism or the war economy, environmental devastation, particularly as it affects people of color. For example, factories spewing lead out of their chimneys into neighborhoods, and the distorted moral narrative that people are poor because they deserve it. The idea in American mythology that anybody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And if they don't, God helps those who help themselves is kind of this distorted moral narrative, blaming the poor rather than helping them. Next slide, please. The Poor People's Campaign is nonpartisan. It does not support any one particular political party. It is a moral fusion movement, bringing in partners from other movements. We have many aligned groups in the state, including our Wisconsin Revolution, Expo, several Hispanic groups. It builds the power of impacted people. Every meeting, we have voices of impacted people giving their testimonies about how they are affected, for example, with tainted water that they can't drink or feed their children with tainted water in Wausau. We are building voter participation and building moral activism. Next slide. The Poor People's Campaign has a report on COVID, income, and death that is very important to read. And if you go to their website, you can click on Learn, and it drops down and you can get the report, which is in the next slide. But an example is in the next slide. The report of COVID intersection of race and income, compiled in coordination with Howard University and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. It's a very impressive study that provides an interactive map on the intersection of death rate, income, population, and race in each county in the United States. So you can go to this map, look at Rock County, and see how it compares with, for example, Dane or Milwaukee or Greene County in terms of the death rate and that as it intersects with income and population. There are also reports in the study of how economic impacts by gender and race. You can look at how women were affected by the COVID impact and women with race. So Black women and white women and how they were affected economically. There is information on police shooting rate in each state. That was really stunning to me to realize that some of the Western states had very, very high rates. Information about the percent of income of housing in each county. Next slide, please. Mass incarceration and pandemic is a very important summary in that too. One of the most powerful messages there was the last one, that each year spent in prison is associated with a 2-year decline in life expectancy. So that a young man of 30 who is in prison for 5 years will die 10 years earlier than his cohort. COVID cases were 5 times higher among incarcerated people than the public. Next slide, please. You can sign up to join the march in Washington on the website. It will be in the chat registration form. As of now, buses are going from Madison and Milwaukee, and you can get a free ride up until the 23rd. And the next slide has my contact information. So please contact me if you have any questions, or I can give you any additional information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally, for that information. And Amy, will you be sure and put that information in the chat? I did have a question about the information, and there's so much that's being shared tonight. That information will be in the chat and also on YouTube. At this time, I would like to ask Stephanie Gates to share a little bit about what's going on in the Janesville School District as far as the stakeholders. That's an experience for teenagers. So Stephanie, you have a couple minutes.
Okay, hi Jean. I won't need but a couple, will only take a few minutes. I'm actually filling in for Angela Lynch. She is our lead diversity coordinator for the district. And so she left me with some notes to read for this presentation. And the reason she could not be here today is because she is in a class, and the class is called Coalition for Leading Anti-Racist Schools. Angela Lynch and Sandra Robinson have been participating in this course, which is offered by PLACE, Professional Learning and Community Education, which is a division of the UW-Madison School of Education. They've been doing this for the entire year for the 2021 school year. There are school district administrators, teachers from around the district, from around the state who participate in this course. And Angela and Sandra have learned more about how to use anti-racist cycles of inquiry forced on, Angela and Sandra have learned more about how to use anti-racist cycles of inquiry focused on discovery, disrupting, dismantling, and driving out of existing inequities. And so if you have any questions about this course, Angela Lynch said, please feel free to reach out to her. Now, as it relates to the school district of Janesville, our district equity structure is called Excellence for All. which is based on the DPI Promoting Excellence for All structure. DPI did a multi-year study of schools and districts in the state that had the best outcomes for students of color. The following 4 areas were found to be the most effective structures for equity work in the school district and in schools. The first one is staff-student relationships. Second, effective instruction. Third, school instructional leadership. And 4th, stakeholder engagement. And based on these 4 areas, our district developed committees and teams to focus on equity work exclusively. These are the 4 committees and teams that have been in place for the past 6 years. Our CREATE team, at every one of our 21 schools, CREATE, which stands for Culturally Responsive Education for All, Training and Enhancement. This addresses staff-student relationships and effective instruction. Our steering committee, this is at the district level. This group is composed of school district administrators and staff members. They are responsible for planning the professional learning for our entire school district. What they develop gets passed on to the CREATE teams to help implement in their buildings. This committee covers school instructional leadership. Our Stakeholder Committee, this is the most important part of equity work for our district. The committee includes middle and high school students and 1 parent, community members, and district administrators and staff members. There have been approximately 15 to 20 students per year that participate on this committee. These students have been able to attend the YWCA Racial Justice Conferences each year, which they absolutely love. They have participated in the YWCA Stand Against Racism rallies for multiple years, and a couple of times we have actually had students who actually presented. Students were able to be in focus groups that helped select our new superintendent, which was very huge, and they were so proud of that. And each year, the students come up with a goal that they want to achieve during the year. Some of the activities they have accomplished are supporting 5th graders with the transition into middle school, supporting 8th graders with the transition into high school, participating as facilitators for our Unity through Diversity retreats for students and a separate one for staff. And they also have input on our professional development and training for our staff, which is something that's done annually, and it goes out district-wide. Every member participates in that training. So that concludes basically what we're doing right now for our diversity equity for the school district of Janesville.
Stephanie, thank you so much. And the stakeholders is a marvelous idea. I'm really hoping that other schools in Rock County can talk with you and create something like stakeholders in their own school. Next slide, please. We have some suggestions of what you can do as adults and what you can do as individuals. And this is the adult one, obviously, and I'm very pleased with just a few suggestions I decided to put in tonight. Race to Equity, Rock County. If you have nothing else comes from this program tonight, please take the time to see reality listed in words in this report. YWC
Dean?
is excellent. Yes.
Do you have one more speaker?
Pardon?
Was this Shanti? Going
No.
to talk?
No. Thanks. There's a TED Talk that I think you'd really be interested in. It's by Heather McGee, and she wrote the book, Some of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. It's excellent. And it does a great job of showing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the last one is donate time or dollars to your area, grow your own multiple teacher scholarships. This goes on in Beloit and Janesville through private funds, and students who are interested in becoming teachers have an opportunity to gain scholarship funds from the minority group. It's an excellent opportunity started by Tim Cullen. Respond to the Poor People's Campaign. And then I'd also like to recommend for startup-based businesses to check with Beloit and Hedberg Public Libraries. They definitely have information sources to help out. And then Gina Stevens with Rock County Jumpstart is doing a marvelous job with minority startup businesses. Next slide, please. And as a youth, I'd like to suggest you get in touch with Erin Conway. She is an amazing advocate for the youth and does a marvelous job. Here's her email address, different clubs that are in some of the different schools. You'll see that they're doing a good job of working with the minority. LGBT resources, and that'll be in the chat. A very, very interesting opportunity. So please get in touch with Ashanti. She's with the Rock County Teen Voice, and with this year, with COVID being so drastically affecting our young people, please get in touch with her from a to work together for strengthening our youth. It is for the teenagers, 14 to 18. The teens can also check into the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. And then, talking about minority group, our youth do feel like they are minorities in a lot of situations. So this is where they are major. They are very strong in their computer skills. So we're hoping that they will volunteer to help improve successful opportunities for those who need that extra help. Okay. And I'd like to thank Dorothy Harrell, who worked with me in planning this program, along with all the speakers, and also with each one of you who decided to come tonight. I have a comment that I'd like to share with you that I feel is so important. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are touchstones for a healthier community. Change is inevitable. The world is changing and we must grow with it. We can meet people where they are. We must. And you are encouraged to continue striving for awareness, understanding, and action to make this a positive shared future. So I'd like to share the opportunities. We will be having this on the Hedberg Public Library YouTube channel. So tune in a couple of days and that'll be available for you. Diversity Action Team programs will begin again in the fall. Courageous Conversations will be this Monday, and they will be dealing with young Black boys growing into men. It's an excellent opportunity to learn more about people of color and the challenges that those young men face. We have a lunch and learn this summer, sponsored by the YWCA It's not until July 28th, but go ahead and mark your calendar and be sure to register for it. And talking about marking your calendar, November 10th, Thursday, is the 8th annual Racial Justice Conference. That was started by Angela Moore and the YWCA, and is an outstanding opportunity. So please take advantage of it. And contact information, Tasha and Atira, we appreciate so much what you had to share today, especially your work making it available to the whole county. So thank you so very much. All right, we appreciate all of you being a part of our evening, and thank you. Do what you can. You can make a difference. You know that. Good evening.
So I think this is where we can stop the recording, and this will be the unmoderated Q&A, right? Or after parking lot.
No, it's not recorded now, and it'll just be our process for the critiquing right now. So.
Okay.